So my name is Morten Elvang. Welcome to the Agile Strategy Meetup group. Today is a real pleasure to have Suhit Anantula joining us from Australia. And Suhit is just in the very last part of publishing your new book, which you will talk about. And then we will have like 30 minutes for the presentation and then time for conversation after that. And by tradition, I'm actually going to leave it like this. So I would like to hand over to you, Suhit. Thanks a lot for joining us. Please.
Yep.
Thanks, Martin. It's great to be part of this. Really appreciate you reaching out and asking me to talk to your group. And thanks everyone for joining. It's great to talk to all you guys in Europe. It's actually not a bad time. It's about 4:30 in Adelaide, so it's not a bad time for me at all. And I think it's a bit of a morning time for you. So really appreciate you guys joining. What I want to do was I'll share a bit of slides. I'll talk you through some of the thinking I've had around my new book, and then we can have a very open chat about all of that. So let me share my slides, and then we go from there. All right, can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I want to talk about the Helix moment. And what this is part of my new book, which is called the Helix moment. And I'll explain to you the logic and what I'm doing there and how I'm thinking about it. And this idea of rhythms and how they help. So before I go ahead, a bit about me. So I've spent the last 20 years in strategy and design. So this is Patrick. He's actually from Amsterdam. Patrick runs Business Models Inc., which funded the work with Osterwalder, which created the business model canvas. So if anybody of you familiar with that, that's part of the DNA from which we have come from. And so I worked with Patrick and the team for many years. And we won this Good Design Award. And I kind of put this out not just for the award, but this idea of combining strategy and design, which actually kind of a lot of people see it as separate things. So I love this idea of kind of bringing them together. And that's kind of the genesis about part of the book that I'm writing, finished writing, which is how do you blend strategy and design? But then how do you bring AI into this conversation? So that's kind of where I'm going with this. But AI is not the most important part, I can assure you. So before I go ahead, I want to talk to you about this new kind of lens that I've created in the book. It's called Lines, Loops, and Vibes. And I see the world as three rhythms. So agile is generally the loops part, right? We're very familiar with adaptive, iterative, testing, and all that. And for a long time, we've also been using lines, structured and planned. And for some reason, with the agile coming up, there's been a bit of backlash against traditional linear thinking, which I think is a bit unfair. But we also need vibes, which are like more fluid and sensing and emergent. And these are your weak signals, these are your cultural context. These are things that are hard to explain. These are gut feels, these are scenario planning and trends. There's a whole bunch of things that sit there. But what I saw was this idea that there's actually all these things are live at the same time. None of them are wrong or right, and it's not a hierarchy. There are different modes of thinking and seeing and working. And so I started to see this in individuals. So each one of us are more lines or loops or vibes. You can see that in teams. You can see culturally, say the finance team is a bit more line and loops. Marketing team could be a bit more vibes and loops. The product team is very loopy. You can also see organizations itself having a very different culture, very different rhythms. And what I found fascinating is that as I went through this, I saw this with strategy, I saw this with design, I saw this with AI itself, and all of them actually having lines, loops, and vibes. So I'm going to walk you through today an example of how that shows up and what it means, and love to really have a chat on that. So I've even structured my presentation as lines, loops, and vibes. So lines are like the strong ideas that I'll share, clear ideas. Loops are like some things that I've done well and still testing. And vibes are really out there ideas that you may fully not agree with me. So this is the book, The Helix Moment. It's how to think, design, and lead in what I'm calling the co-intelligent age. This is the age where human and machine intelligence is going to be combining together. So the idea of the helix is that strategy and design strands come together. And it's super important that we do that because we've been separating strategy and design for a long time. But more importantly, they are sitting in this context of human plus AI. This idea that actually that there is a larger context that's happening, which is not about task automation or augmentation. We're going to have a different kind of co-intelligence of human plus AI sitting around everything we do. And how do we kind of make that happen? So that's really what the book is about. And the goal of the book is this idea of how do we kind of not just do strategy and design, but how do we kind of do that in the context of where the world is going with this. So at every part of the book, I've tried to kind of anchor this conversation with what does it mean to have human plus AI working on it. So of course, I'll not get everything right, but the idea was to push myself to see how much you can integrate this human and AI conversation in every part of what we do. So the book itself follows lines, loops, and vibes. The book is structured in three parts. The first section is very clear about what we want to do with lines. The second section is all about the strategy and design process. And the third section is speculative ideas that I've been exploring, which have no definite answers. And I've also structured the presentation, as I said, with the same logic, so it kind of sticks with us. So setting up the presentation, we're going into the loops mode. Here, I want to talk a bit more about the strategy process and how we can actually understand strategy slightly differently with a new angle. Big fan of Drucker. I've learned everything I know for a long time from Drucker. And I've realized that there's been so many different waves of strategy, right? So we've got all the way when Drucker wrote the book, Managing for Results. This is 1964, I think. He was actually asked by his editor not to use the word strategy because that was considered a military thing. So he called it Managing for Results. But that's possibly the first strategy book in the world. But then now we've got a whole bunch of conversations on strategy. So having looked through the last 40, 50 years of strategy, I'm like, how do you kind of bring that together in a way that makes sense to people? And you can look at this and work on it. So I spent a lot of time trying to find some way of organizing strategy. So I started with the frameworks itself. So Playing to Win comes from Roger Martin. If you're familiar with that, that's possibly one of the most famous frameworks right now. 5 questions, easy to understand, work with. I had a privilege of spending 3 hours with Roger, and it was really interesting to get into his mind about how he does it. Theory of the Business is a very is unknown but very good framework from Drucker. It's a 1994 HBR article. It's part of his older books. It talks about the larger context in which organizations make decisions and how we make assumptions about our environment, about our mission, about our core competencies, and how they matter. OODA loop comes from, if you're familiar with it, from the military space actually, about how we kind of create faster loops and make decisions. And lean startup, we all know from the lean startup world. And there's more framework. So I said, okay, how do I bring all these frameworks that I love? Because I've never used the same framework in the same way in any of my work. And I've also used different frameworks. But then frameworks are only useful if they actually solve a problem. And interestingly, most leaders don't worry about frameworks, right? They care about their own problems. Like, hey, I'm starting this new business. What do I do? The world is moving too fast. There's all these tantrums from Trump, and we got this tariffs. How do we change? What is this AI about? Like, how do I integrate AI into my business, right? These are the questions that leaders ask. They don't ask frameworks. So I started to kind of use my design lens and say, let's start with pain points of leaders. But at the same time, how do we make it practical for people to implement? So I created what I call the 7 dysfunctions of strategy and basically mapped 7 pain points. And each pain point has a name in the book. And for example, we don't know where to start is all about a phase one, which is about analysis paralysis, right? So we have lots of things, but we don't know where to start. So I've kind of diagnosed each pain point, then said, what kind of a rhythm are they currently in, and what rhythm will help them to get unstuck from the pain point? And potentially, what is a good framework they can use that supports that pain point to be solved? And they don't have to use the exact one. But it was a way to kind of bring all this complexity into one place. So having working through 7 dysfunctions, you start to see and connect to more than one dysfunction possibly. And you can see this and say, hey, that's the dysfunction that makes sense to me. And so, for example, if the world is changing too fast, then the actual LLV mode is going from loop to line because you need to kind of test a bit, but then have a clear clarity of where you want to go. And the OODA loop is actually a fantastic framework that matches that problem. You can use any of the other ones, but that was a good example. And then you have AI supporting it. Same with, for example, strategy feels disconnected from teams. And one of the reasons I think that happens is because there's not collaborative innovation. It all comes from the top, and it's one angle that goes forward. So I try to kind of match pain points with LLV with the framework in a way that means that we're not actually trying to support any one idea of using strategy, but actually being very pluralistic about whatever framework that works for you, we can go through. So I thought, let me kind of do a deep dive. So I've taken up the pink one, our plans never get used, and emergent strategy, which is the framework that supports it. And want to kind of walk you through how I wrote that in the book and what it looks like, and then we can go forward with that. So this dysfunction is basically where there's a lot of beautiful plans. As you can see, the lines on the top, those explain to that they are stuck in a line mode, right? You have these beautiful plans. You've got 30 pages, 50 pages, 200 pages. They read beautifully. The board is approving the document, but nobody actually uses this strategy because nobody actually ever got it, and we never move forward. It's just a nice looking document, and I'm sure we've all seen that happen in our life. And so, how do we get out of it, right? How do we get out of that? So, let me walk you through a potential example and really kind of give a new lens to an old challenge. So, if you know this guy, his name is Ron Johnson. So, Ron Johnson worked with Steve Jobs from 2000 to really set up the Apple Store. So if you've been to the Apple Store, you know the great experience you have and the amazing benefit that Apple Store has created for Apple, and the iconic how iconic it has become. And everybody now is copying Apple stores. I've seen Samsung and Microsoft and other stores, and they all look the same now. And this guy worked with Steve Jobs to create it, and Steve called him the best retail executive in the world. But then he left Apple and he said, "What do I do next?" So he joined JC Penney. So JCPenney is a very what do you call low cost retailer in the US. And what happened is unfortunately he couldn't really do the job that he was supposed to do. And in about less than 2 years, he was ousted of his job, and the guy who he replaced actually came back. The shares have fallen more than half, and he had a lot of issues. So his idea was, this worked in Apple, let me take it to JCPenney. So he called it fair and square pricing, same price every day, no sales, no coupons. And just like Apple will give you an amazing price. And then people said, look, that's not JCPenney's culture. That's not how our customers come to us. We actually believe in coupons. Our customers love our coupons. But he said, we don't test at Apple. And this is a very interesting statement for him to say because we believe that Apple works like anybody else. They are like a design agency. They're fully focused on design, so they would be testing a lot. And I think it's an interesting statement that he made because if you kind of see from angle of when Steve was running the business, Steve saw himself and his colleagues as the potential customers of a product, and he would test them on themselves. So he did test, but maybe not really with all the customers in the same way that other people would test, right? And I can't believe that Ron couldn't see that. But that's what his statement was. Like, we don't talk to people, we don't test, we have a strategy, we just go and implement it. So even though he had strategic brilliance, right, when he worked with this, I am seeing that potentially what he lacked was rhythmic intelligence, not understanding that he's actually stuck in a rhythm that doesn't work for JCPenney, but works for Apple. And not that any of those are wrong or right, but it's like, what is a rhythm do I need in my context? And so the big insight that I want to kind of share from what I'm trying to do in the book is that it's actually not about diagnosing the wrong problem only. It's not about implementing differently. It's actually that there's a whole bunch of rhythm mismatches that happen where people take the wrong rhythm to the problem or diagnose the wrong rhythm of the problem itself, and so the solution doesn't make sense. So he purely operated in the lines mode, right? No testing, no feedback, no adaptation. And more importantly, he didn't even sense the customer emotional attachment for coupons on deals. That JCPenney customer was exactly opposite to the Apple customer. The Apple customer knew that this is the product, this is the price. I just walk in, I'm going for the experience, and I'm not worried about the price. The JCPenney customer was the exact opposite, and not able to even sense that is a big, question mark on how he actually sees the world. And then this LLV solution, like if you really look into it, right, is that you would start with these loops, but you would also have vibes. You would vibes with your employees, vibes with the customer, vibes with the market, and then only if it works, you would scale it. It sounds very obvious, of course. Like what I'm saying is not like a new breakthrough, or any of you would say that's obvious. But then at the same time, you have people like Ron Johnson, who's extremely successful executive, still struggling. So there's something happening where what looks obvious is not actually obvious in some context. And so the idea is to understand what is actually happening here and how does it break off. And what is interesting here is that this whole idea of emergence, right? Margaret Wheatley talked about it. And then we have got emergent strategy, which has been very famous for a long time. This idea that you actually cannot get stuck with the original idea, but we need to be open to things that happen. And we need to leave room for signals. We need to let parts of our plan stay open, but actually we need to bring those new ideas in. And at the base level, it's a very simple idea because we see emergence everywhere, right? You see emergence at the level of your traffic, you see emergence at the level of countries, you see emergence in how ants do their job. So emergence is actually everywhere. It's just that we don't understand how this happens in complex systems for strategy. And part of this is this mindset of being open about that emergence, which means that you can actually work differently. So not only JCPenney, right? Like a lot of organizations are stuck in this lines mode where we kind of have this plan, we want to implement the plan, irrespective of what happens, that is the way we want to go ahead. And unfortunately, especially now post-COVID, now post-AI, this is actually much more harder to do and almost illogical to do. And emergent strategy says that we need to have a very fluid rhythm, right? There's a whole bunch of examples of companies who showing fluidity, right? Slack started as a gaming company, and their messaging system internally was so good that they realized this actually goes out to everyone, and Slack got sold for $27 billion. Netflix actually does a great job of combining algorithms and human connection to understand what is the vibe, but also what is the algorithmic way we actually provide content to everyone. And the beauty is that they get vibes from all over the world, right? Today it's a hit from Korea. The next time it'll be a hit from Brazil. Sometimes it's from Europe. Sometimes it's from US. So there's this beautiful kind of understanding of cultural context that they bring to the conversation before they actually bring in algorithms. And then Microsoft actually is one of the most interesting stories for me because a large company that was failing, Steve Ballmer was arrogant, and then comes Nadella with his idea of empathy and not know-it-alls but learn-it-alls, and really changes the context. And he starts to kind of look at empathy and vibes and AI, and his original investment with OpenAI has been a no-brainer hit. So this idea that the successful companies and leaders seem to have an idea of how to change their rhythm based on the context. Because if you look at Slack, you can say it's a startup, so they did that. But if you look at Microsoft, Satya Nadella was a lifelong Microsoft. He didn't come from the outside. Generally, you want people coming from the outside who bring new ideas, but he was actually from Microsoft all his life. So how did he actually succeed in changing Microsoft if he's actually a long time, lifelong Microsoftie? And that's because he understood that the world has changed, and that means he can't get stuck in the same strategy approach. And then AI is a whole bunch of things we can do with AI, which are very obvious for us, right? So I kind of use this three layering in the book where AI as a strategic accelerant, AI as a strategic connector, and AI as a strategic amplifier. And these three things kind of help us use AI in a way that actually helps us with every strategic challenge, right? So you can do rapid modeling, rapid adaptation. You can also do execution mapping. You can do cross-functional insight sharing. The rhythm challenge I talked to you before, I think, and this is a hunch right now, is that part of the reason people struggle to talk to each other because they work in different rhythms. But what if AI becomes like your translator of the rhythms, right? Like actually helping people understand how they work with each other. And finally, this idea of weak signal detection, pattern recognition, experiment testing, emergent opportunity sensing, there are ways we can actually use AI to support that process for us, right? So what is happening here is that we're still the same people. We understand what we're doing, but we can actually accelerate every part of what we do by using AI in part of this. So the seven dysfunctions basically kind of is a kind of a lens to this problem, right? So it kind of help us look at this challenge differently. So for example, we are stuck reacting and not thinking long term. So if that's the pain point, what is really interesting is that the company is not able to sense the future, which is where I said, okay, what if we can combine Drucker's theory of the business and strategic foresight in one place and kind of start bringing this kind of more sensing mode, right? So, for example, this whole idea of AI strategic amplifier, right? This whole sensing detection. If you bring that in, then you're not stuck. You're able to kind of start looking at the future in a different way because everything feels so hard and everything is moving in different directions, so that ability to kind of start with vibes rather than loops and lines may help you to open up. Again, these are all conjectures, these are not always true, but that's one way of kind of getting out of this. So the idea is kind of making the complicated strategic challenges and frameworks and ideas all into some simple way that people may actually start to remember and use and implement quickly. So coming to the kind of final part of the presentation, which is vibes, this idea that, and again, of course, I've made this up, but this idea of rhythmic intelligence is something that I'm starting to see as a potentially a helpful way to understand the world, understand organizations, understand strategy, and how organizations are able to understand and use it and implement it may make a difference as we go forward. So there's a lot more examples, but I'm doing a lot more understanding to see where this goes. And then there's this idea in the book that I'm again as a vibe, so it's not obviously it's not something that is fully confident for me, but that's the whole idea with vibes is like it's a weak signal. So what does a multi-rhythm organization look like, right? So what if sales is actually more vibes and then a bit loops and lines, but marketing is vibes, but actually goes into lines and then loops. Product development is actually more about looping, and then these are all like made up, right? This doesn't have to be true at all. So, for example, we know that Apple is actually a vibes-based marketing, but Google is actually very lines-based because Google uses data analytics to make decisions around sales and marketing. So even within the same kind of function, you will find that the rhythms could be different. But the reason I did this was, what if we could actually map teams and approaches and then say, is our environment that's changing, is our industry that's where it is, where we want to go with strategy, does our rhythms actually help us achieve that goal or not? And so if that lens could actually help us unlock a new way of working, unlock new ideas about how we solve it, maybe that could be helpful. So that's kind of the idea behind the multi-rhythm organization. And of course, the whole human plus AI stuff is so critical. The more we can understand, learn, figure out where these two intelligence come together, and how we build not just a co-intelligence rhythm at the individual level, but at the team level, and then finally, how do we build co-intelligent organizations? I think that will start to really create some new opportunities for us and new ways of working that could be very interesting. Um, so that's a bit about from me in terms of what I wanted to share. And maybe I would just want to stop here and then we can have a quick chat. But I've got a bit more ideas to share, but I want to have a break here.
Thank you, Suhit. Let's start with opening it up for
Yep.
those of you who called in.
I think there are actually really, really interesting thoughts, right? So it's, as you describe it, it's always like, okay, you said it yourself. Sometimes it even sounds a little bit trivial or obvious, but
Awesome.
I think it's a nice pattern that you make up to understand things, how they work or why they work here and not there. And one thought I had while listening to you was that I've experienced that um, for example, I work in a company that definitely comes from the lines way of doing things.
Yep.
And I have witnessed in the recent past that the strategy is already advanced from that. So it says, okay, we have to really listen to our customers, and it's not just about a system that can, or a product that can deliver a little bit more power or whatever. But it's also about sensing what is really happening on the customer's ground and what are their needs and things. And we understand that, but our processes are still, and our
Yeah.
part of our culture is still going in this lines way and keeps us from approaching the problem in a different way and really sit with the customer and try to figure out what are they figuring out. So how do they deal with changes, and where are they going, and I like this idea of the vibes, because, or these weak signals, because that's also what I see. It's not really like getting out and getting jobs to be done,
Yes. No,
and
that's still far away.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
then knowing what the customer wants. So this is something that I think we are not that bad in, but there's more beyond, because there's so much uncertainty, not only with us, also with our customers, and it gets very hard to align that with a 3 years product cycle that we have.
No,
So yeah.
yeah, that's beautifully said. I think I'm loving the way you've explained and able to translate very quickly that you're in lines mode. You can able to see that there's vibes changing, but you can't bring that back in. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? So it's obvious at one level, right? This is like we see it. But I think the thing that I'm trying to do with this language and the book is that calling the obvious out in a way that is not non-threatening, just saying as it is, like these are different modes of working. And then if you diagnose it, then you can say, what is the solution? The solutions is we do a bit more vibes. And then we and make the loops
Mhm.
faster because the vibes are changing. So if the loops go faster in your product development cycle, then obviously then your lines will be affected. But then if it comes from data, it comes from logic. It's not just some lines changing for the reason of changing lines. It's so that those three layers actually start to work together in a very nice way. But to your point, if you know the culture is very lines, then how do we kind of create a more how do we bring a bit more vibes? How do we bring structure around loops so that the lines culture still remains? Again, they are not right and wrong, right? Just knowing
Mhm.
what they are,
Mhm.
helpful to kind of understand it. So, you said it beautifully. I'm really glad that it's resonating, the language and the approach, and that you're able to see it. Just a question from my point of view, I guess, is what would open up that different rhythm? Like, what would it take to open up in your organization if we have to change the rhythm?
Good question. I believe it's always people who make changes, right?
Yeah.
So what we see is you need to find a sponsor for that in a large organization to drive things, and to say, yeah, well, let's do it differently. And then if the argument is good, then also the colleagues will follow, and his part or her part of the organization will follow. So it's very hard to change that from bottom up. You can have
Yep.
um, your small successes in this, but it's very, very hard to really make a big difference, maybe you can show it works, and then others will adopt it. It's like this organization coming from roots, but it's in the end, I think it needs to be adopted or agreed by a sponsor who really says, let's do it different this time. Let's just try it. Let's see how it works out. Let's go with the customer and really listen to them, give them a bad prototype
Yes.
that we can try, and where we really get the feedback, what they don't like, what they like, what their own ideas are. Let's not try to be perfect here, because that's something that we also do, of course. If we go in lines, we want to deliver a perfect product. That's the idea of all our gate processes
Totally,
and
of course.
stuff,
And that's the
right?
end result, right? That's the end result. Yeah.
Exactly. In the end, you want to deliver that perfect product that doesn't break down after 3 million kilometers on the road and everything. Yeah. So that's where you have to go. And in the end, you have to go through all this scrutiny of testing things well and making sure they are robust. But it's not the way how you figure out what the customer needs and where
Yes.
things are going, and that's something that we have to understand, and we have to expand this, let's say, the tool set that we have, let's say.
Yep.
And what I also get, and I'm really happy to find promoters of this idea, that it's not about waterfall against agile,
Yes.
lines
Correct.
against loop, right? It's about what fits when, and when should we apply what, and how do we get these transformations from, okay, this went through iterations, and now let's get into a gate stage process to make sure we really got all the checklists worked down in the right sequence.
Correct. And that's a big one I'm really passionate about, because I think this idea of loops better than lines is wrong. I think it's
Yeah.
just context driven, it's organizational driven, it's also your product driven.
Hmm.
Maybe it works for software a bit, but it doesn't work for everything. We just have to be very careful with how we see this. So part of the goal with this is to normalize these three rhythms as normal modes of working. And no,
Hmm.
none of them is better than the others. They're all
Let's
contextual.
let's check for other reactions. Thanks for chipping in,
Yeah,
Edvard. I really
sorry for
appreciate it.
taking so much time.
Well, that's why we are here. Any other questions, reactions?
Maybe could take over for a or listen in and talk. I've been struggling with these questions since 2012. Started at
Okay.
Ericsson working with these things, and I created some kind of workshop around communication and feedback in teams. And somewhere there, I've always tried to how do I get a grip on this? So I'm so happy that I'm listening in today, because this is a thing I've been struggling. I've been struggling with this since I started 2012, with going into these things and trying to get a how do I explain and how do we work with it and how do we get the different things. I've been working at Volvo Cars for 2 years as a Scrum Master, but I took
Okay.
some kind of agile coach grip on it to see that things happen with the safe planning and such that the
Yep.
managers didn't really understand. So I had to create an environment in Miro that people understood how to work with it. But the large problem with now I'm going to a long explanation, but uh, um, Volvo Cars, I think they started with that they realized, oh shit, here's Tesla. What should we do? And they
Hmm.
had to start with the agile movement from that.
Hmm.
But it was 1 or 2 years ago, they threw it all out. So we don't need these Scrum Masters or Agile coaches, and so we'll go back to something else. And that's why
Okay.
the market is hiring project leaders, because they can drive things harder. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. They've lost so much with doing this, but that's the way they did it. And actually, it's a trend that they throw out. us as Scrum Masters and product owners and agile coaches, unfortunately. So for me, I'm so interested. Do they really understand what you're talking about from management or owners or risk capitalists, or what do you call it? Because that's the problem, is to get the understanding of, let's do it. Let's start with it, and let's see to that we can actually change into the modern world. This fast-moving, fast-pacing thing. Do you get reactions from the people that can say, yeah, let's do it?
So I think what you just said is very interesting, right? Because people are so fundamentally stuck with frameworks,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
also frameworks of the current vibe, if I use my own language.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like agile is the flavor of the moment, so we all have to be agile, right? So this idea that, and this is why if you walk through the walking through the presentation was, I've tried to say it like you can use any framework you want, even
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Scrum.
Yes. Yes. It's a
I,
good start, I think. Yes.
I
Yeah.
don't want to kind of get stuck. I've read all possible books. I've looked at all the frameworks. I respect all of these people, but there's no right answer. There's no one framework that does everything, right?
No.
So one ring to rule the world, right? This is not a lot of rings, and so we have to be thinking through and saying, okay, what is the right context? So same as strategy frameworks, the rhythms are the same. It's not whether agile is good or project leaders are bad. It's actually like, if you want to get into the electric world, which is what they did with Polestar, with Volvo, it's
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
idea that
Yes.
you need a lot of vibes and loops. But once you have that, you need lines. You need
Yeah.
structured approaches. You need to actually build a car. You need to scale the car.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need
Yes.
to get
Yes.
your
Yes.
pricing right. It can't always be just agile. So this idea that there's no right and wrong, but it's actually about not throwing away agile, not bringing in project leaders. It's actually, this is the point of rhythmic intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So I'm
Yes.
trying to invent a new language here, but the idea is that how do you have rhythmic intelligence to understand when do you need lines, loops, and vibes?
Yeah. Yes.
How do you match the right person to it? Because you know what, we're all different. We all have different rhythms that dominate us.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
which problem in the organization requires which rhythm focus? And so if we can actually start to deeply think about those challenges like that, it starts to help us think, oh, we need agile actually at this moment. But after this, we need lines. And so it's not throwing all of agile or keeping all of project leaders. It's actually bringing the right thing at the right context, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
so that's kind of but look, very glad to hear that it's resonating with you. Somebody like you who's been in Scrum and Agile, and actually
Yes.
this is you. That's great. To really happy to hear that. That's fantastic. Thank you, Stephen.
Oh, thank you. But people get stuck in KPIs, I think.
Yes, and we should
Let's
have
say,
KPIs. We should still do
So,
that. But
so yeah, yes.
yes.
So
let's give others a chance.
yes,
Thanks,
sorry.
Stefan.
So, yes.
Any other questions, comments?
Okay. I like these rhythmic approaches just because it simplify like quite a difficult thing to really these three approaches. If you look at the strategic level for the company, for example, you have like departments, and as you mentioned, for operation, everybody wants to have it like lines, but that's like that's what everybody has want. But if you look at it closely, if you want to react on the change, you need people there or teams who will be more open to new ideas. And that's like different between departments. And then you have teams which can be different. And at the end, as you mentioned, right, is about the person at the end, because everybody has a different attitude for different problems. And it's the same like in real life. If you, for example, going to work, you going on time because there is that line approach. But if you try to look at some different problem, you can use what's for everybody like more pleasant for different problems. So yeah, as I mentioned, it simplifies quite a difficult topic about how to approach these things to these three simple lines, loops, swipes, and that's quite interesting.
That's great to hear. That's what I felt when I would say I stumbled upon this idea, right? Like I can't say that I invented it. I just saw it and I put names to it because we all understand. Once you hear, you understand it. So it's not something that I invented, but right, but I could put names to something that we are all seeing. And that's what I felt. It was simplifying the complexity, right? But to your manufacturing operations part is so critical, right? We want lines at the end, but we don't want everybody to be on lines, right? It's a very interesting challenge, right? We want it to be perfectly running like that, but you actually want to bring those new ideas in and make it happen. So especially I'm working with a lot with AI with companies, and like they're struggling because they're trying to bring what is a very vibe loopy thing into a lines world, and it's very hard to do it straight away unless you change the rhythm. But also to your point, Mikhail, it's finding the person who's got that attitude toward that. Like
Yeah.
you can't get everybody to be like that. You need to find those people who've got the different rhythms, who are naturally those rhythmic people, or have the ability to change their rhythm based on context. That's totally possible, but you just need to know that, and then you work differently. And if you can work differently, then obviously the outcomes will start to be different. So, that's very, very good to hear your resonance to that. But what you're talking about is a very real problem when you want to change.
I think we have given everyone a chance, but otherwise, please chip in. So I had one question, and we had a chat earlier, and I really like this way of observing the world that you are sharing with us. So it is a way of observing the world. The reason why we set up this meetup group was that there is something going on around the topic of strategy, and Agile never really had a good grip on it. So the idea is that how can we help our colleagues to maybe move into that world, which is getting more important, but actually also stronger connected to the daily observations through the things that you are sharing. So would it be possible for you to somehow share sort of the gist of where do you see the topic of strategy going with the work
Yeah,
you have been doing on the wipe
yeah,
loops
yeah.
and
Yes.
lines?
Thanks, Lauren. It's a big question, and I try to talk about it in the book because look, I didn't feel like I should write about this book because I felt like there was so much written on strategy. You don't need another book on strategy. But what I realized was three different things. One is that there's actually too much information on strategy. So this idea of actually having seven pain points and what I call the seven dysfunctions and seven phases of strategy just helps simplify the whole strategy landscape, right? And any organization can have multiple problems at the same time, valid, but generally those seven cover most of your problems. Most of your problems. That's number one. Second, there's simplification of frameworks. I think we have spent too much of time on frameworks in the strategy space. There's entire books written on each framework, and they're useful. I've consumed them, and you can see at the back all the strategy books. I love them, but they're not helpful because there's too much of information. There's no right and wrong. So it's actually saying use what works in the right context. The third thing is, and where strategy is really changing, and this is what my journey to this book is, we have not incorporated something as practical as design into strategy. The design guys and the strategy guys talk totally different language, sit in different places, don't work together. And strategy is useless if it can't be implemented. And design is a beautiful way to implement it. And I've actually, second part of the book, which I'm not sharing here, is what I call the five P's of loop design. It's an entirely new framework on design thinking, on AI and design, and it's a new way of looking at design. So that's the other part of the book which I'm not sharing, but that's the thing I'm bringing in. And lastly, I think we have to move much faster in strategy.
Mhm.
Frankly, if anything post COVID and now post ChatGPT moment has shown us is that this we can't have 5 year, 10-year plans. We have to move much more faster. So this idea
Yeah,
of being more adaptive and bringing this rhythmic intelligence become more
yes, yeah,
important than
yeah,
less. So we all have to change our approach to strategy, and we all have to get
yeah,
more pluralistic
yeah,
rather than being more
yeah,
monolithic about we want only this way of working.
yeah. I love it. You present the seven dysfunctions, and then you
Yes.
tell us how to fix them.
Yes.
Is there a risk, and this might be a bit of a challenging question, is
Yeah.
there a bit of a risk that you're fighting the symptoms and not looking at the root cause? I mean, could there be something, and I think you're alluding to this, so this is why I'm asking, is there something sort of inherently broken in how we have been approaching strategy so far? Or can you still work today with strategy as we have understood it over the last years and
I,
make things work? Where do you see
I,
things going?
I think it's not that bad. I think we still need strategy. Look, I'm big on strategy, right? Because without strategy, then we're just walking with no logic and no context,
So
right?
that's not where I was going. I was not
Yeah.
suggesting a no strategy movement.
Okay.
But it's more like, is there something broken in how we understand and work with strategy? So you present the 7 dysfunctions, and I think they are wonderful. I think that's so spot on, that very well spotted. And I also agree that there's probably not a number 8 of the same magnitude. Still, that's a consequence of how we have been approaching strategy so far. Is there something even more fundamental lurking that we just need to think about in how we are approaching things? Maybe something that could make the dysfunctions go away entirely.
Look, that's a great question. And I think there's a real value in understanding that. As I finished writing the book and I came to this idea of the multi-rhythm organization and then going deeper, I realized that I was touching only the surface of strategy and design, which is I'm solving the maybe a slightly deeper problem, not just a symptom, a deeper symptom, if I can say
Yeah.
that, but not the root cause, right? The
Yes.
root cause, I think, is the human condition and the organizational culture and structure, right? Which
Yeah.
is why I I didn't want to, but I put an entire chapter on multi-rhythm organization at the end.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
looked through the lens of Kodak versus Fuji
Yeah.
films. And I
Yeah.
gave an entire case study on it. And what I
Yeah.
realized in that was it's actually not about strategy. In a sense, it
Yeah.
is, but the root
Mhm.
cause potentially is how we organize and work together as humans and
Yeah.
how we see this world. Because the strategy is an outcome
Yeah.
of how we work, right?
Yeah.
Strategy is not something that
Yeah.
should drive the business. The strategy is the
Yeah.
outcome of
Yeah.
people working together to
Yeah.
create
Yeah.
something.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think the root potentially is the
Yeah.
organizational conversation, which I
Yeah.
have just touched upon in Vibes
Yeah.
because
Yes.
I
Yeah.
thought the book is not designed for
Yeah.
it. So maybe there's a
Yes.
future book. But
Yes.
I fully agree with you that
Okay.
this is may not be the only way to look at
Yeah.
it. There could be a
Yeah.
much deeper
Yes.
conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it even more. So you actually say 2 things, which I think is very fundamental. You talk about strategy as an outcome, and then you talk about the organization. Could we just go a little bit to the latter topic? How do you, because the wipes and the loops and the lines, that's a way of observing yourself in a way.
Yes.
How does that then manifest in how we want to organize? What's the
Yes.
structure of the future AI friendly
Yes. And
organization
this
going to look like?
you're pushing the boundary of my thinking now, right? So, it's all
That's why
speculation.
we are here.
I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to, whether what I'm saying is even right, but that's fine. I want to do that. I want to do that with you guys. It's great to have this conversation because you actually all understand what we're talking about here. So, look, I have a belief that the next 5 years will be a rethinking of organizational
Yeah,
strategy itself, organizational structures itself. That is going
yeah,
to be the biggest effect on us.
yeah, yeah.
I mentioned to you before, but to all of you, there's a great book called Reshuffle. That's from Sangeet Paul
Mhm.
Chowdhury. Sangeet
Yes.
wrote the Platform Revolution and all the work on platform thinking, but he's just launched his new book, Reshuffle. And he really talks about that we need to rethink our entire organizational structures and our ecosystems. That's where the AI
Yeah,
effect is going to be.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that's a very fundamental point he's making. In fact, I was talking to Sangeet and I said, look, you're actually setting up the why and kind of the future change. And I
yeah,
almost said my book is like the starting point of how to do it. It's not
yeah,
everything, but it's a
yeah,
starting point. Because
yeah,
if you take the multi-rhythm organization
yeah,
lens, right? So
yeah,
I hope you all remember that one page where I've put up all
yeah.
the different functions and the
Yes.
rhythms.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's my in into this because what I've realized is once I saw it, and you can't unsee it once you see it, is that all teams have rhythms. And actually, it's a big mismatch of rhythms, of teams, of levels across the structure that is really creating the problem. Rather than calling out and saying people are not adapting to change, or people don't know how to do this, or people are lazy, or people are not ready to do AI, it's actually there's a rhythmic, the lack of rhythmic intelligence. So, hey, if you work in the lines rhythm, how do I introduce something that works for you? If you work in the vibes rhythm, and I'll talk about in the book that actually fully in vibes is dangerous because you also need lines and loops. And so fully in lines is obviously dangerous. We get that. But the same goes for all the three. If you're always stuck in loops, imagine Morton, you're only always testing, like it's useless, right?
Yeah.
You need a bit of vibes and you need to go into lines. You can't just be always in loops. So actually, every part of the rhythm has a positive and a negative. So
Yeah.
what is very important is that we actually first see that. Then we
Yeah.
see how we set up our culture. And
Yeah.
then we say, do we have the wrong rhythm for the
Yeah.
challenge we are facing?
Yeah.
And that's when the start comes. So once we
Yes.
understand that there's a
Yeah.
gap in our goals
Yeah.
and our market needs
Yeah.
and our rhythms, and if we
Yeah.
can change our rhythms, I
Yes.
think there's something beautiful that's possible.
Thank you. Few minutes left, so we want to wrap this up with style. Final question from me. Maybe I can think of another one when we get going. But what's Sweet in your mind? What's the low hanging fruit for people reading your book and taking
Hmm.
it back to the office?
I
People.
think it's LLV. It's lines, loops, vibes, right? Like if even if nobody gets anything out of this book, it's LLV and co-intelligence, right? How you do
Yeah.
strategy, how you do design, you don't have to follow any of the things I've said. But I
Yeah.
think if we can go back and respect the different rhythms that we see everywhere and respect our rhythms and others' rhythms, and then we
Yeah.
really go deep and say it is going to be a co-intelligent future.
Yeah.
It's not about right and wrong. The genie is out of the box. We
Yeah.
have to design for a future which is co-intelligent. If there are
Yeah.
those two things, if people can take forward, I think I'll be pretty grateful.
Thank you.
Maybe if
Any
I
final
yeah,
questions from anyone?
if I may, and I'm interested in Suhit's response to that. So if you take a step back, I think what you do is providing a new language, right? For something that was very hard to describe before. I mean, we always had this, okay, waterfall, agile, blah. But the way you abstract it into and translate it into a new language, I think that gives a new tool to talk about it. And maybe that's also something that helps, well, making this work, that you say, okay, we actually accept that there are different ways of working, and that this should make up ours, or should become part of our strategy. Where do we work in which way? Um, what's your
Yes,
thought?
absolutely right. That's exactly, I think it's where I wanted to go is our strategy of implementation is actually rhythmic intelligence. Is like
Yeah.
which rhythm do we need where? Who are the
Yeah.
right people to lead those rhythms, and how do we combine different rhythms at the team levels, not individual level,
Yeah.
Mhm,
to create the best overall rhythm for the organization,
Yeah.
right?
mhm,
And that's my real hope is that you're absolutely right. I think and that there's a simplification that is actually useful, right? Sometimes simplification is not
Yeah.
useful. But I guess
Mhm.
in this scenario, I think this abstraction layer, the right word, this abstraction layer is actually helpful because
Yeah.
the more people I've talked to, more people resonate with this language. They seem to get it
mhm,
straight away. But at the
Yeah.
same time, they can't explain anything else before that explains this. So there seem to be something working there, right? So we
Yeah.
get it, but it's like, oh, I get
Yeah.
it, but I don't know what I used before this. So
mhm,
so you're right. I think that's the Kodak versus Fujifilm case study in the book is exactly that. It's a multi-decade case study on how many times Kodak and Fuji got their rhythms right and wrong,
Yeah.
and how getting
Yeah.
those rhythms right for Fuji
Yeah.
changed them from a photography company into a chemical and a healthcare company, and
Yeah.
Kodak actually getting stuck in those rhythms and trying to come out and go back and trying to come out and go back into lines got them to where they are. So that's a different lens. There's a disruption lens, right? And we can take the same disruption lens to Fuji and Kodak. But I thought that the disruption lens is an outcome, whereas actually I wanted to explain what's happening inside the company. And I think rhythmic intelligence can actually explain the organizational what happens inside the organization that could help us understand how the strategy shows up at the end. So fully in alignment with what you're saying, Eckhart, and I would love to see how you guys kind of think a bit more. And please reach out, share with me. I would love to see how you're thinking. If you got other ideas, I think there's if you share the deck, Morten, I'll share with you. It's got my details.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I would love to take this conversation not just here, but I want you to kind of question me and push me, but also see if it makes sense. And I would love to see how if that changes how you work even slightly.
Yes.
I was just thinking, can I? Yeah, I don't know what time it is, but a short
I'm
reflection.
fine. I'm fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I was maybe saying to
Make it
to
quick,
the
Stefan.
range. Yeah,
Yes.
yes. I think what we have to convince. It's a bit frustrated, but this is what I've been into all my career with changes. People don't want to change, and the problem for us is management,
Mm.
investors, and the stock market and such things, that they are working with old things and they want to measure the wrong way, and it simmers down into the organizations, and we have to convince these people that this is the right way. And that's otherwise we won't be able to do it. So
I agree, but I think the beautiful thing is, Stephen, like Microsoft or Nvidia or any of these companies, you can see that they listen to the stock market, but they do what they think is right, and that
yeah,
actually then the stock market supports their story.
yeah,
The
okay.
funny thing is that everybody supports your story if you're a winner, right?
Yeah.
So everybody and Jeff Bezos is a good example. For 20 years, he didn't care what the stock market thought, but he just did what it was right, and
Yeah, yeah.
now everybody gets it. So
Mm,
I think the people who really get it just
mm,
do their thing
mm,
because they know it's working.
mm,
So I actually think that, again, that's why I'm saying that I didn't invent any of this, right? I'm just observing and putting a lens on it and language on it. Is that these are leaders who've already done it. They have
mm,
seen it and they know what the change is required.
mm,
They've been also able to translate to the board and the investors that this is the new narrative and
mm,
that's what is required. And I think that you're right, absolutely right. But I also think that once they see it and they see this as the solution, the narrative actually follows itself. And so I actually think that at the end of the day, people only care about outcomes, right?
yeah,
We
yeah.
talk about KPIs, we talk about EPS on the stock market, we talk about profits, but 20 years there was no profits in Amazon.
Mm,
So I think every question that is asked, there's a corollary which people have done in a different way. And I
mm.
think it's because they have confidence in their own story and narrative and what they're achieving in the strategy. And ultimately, that's what matters. So if I want to complete what you're saying in my ways, if people are confident about their way that they're solving and their rhythms are right and they believe that's the right strategy for them, then the rest of the people will follow their story because they love that new idea.
We
Thank
should
you.
search for the strong change makers inside organizations that have the leverage.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
is key. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful conversation, Suhit. Thank you for sharing your work with us. Please remind us, when is it your book is coming out?
It should come out in the next few weeks. I
That's
will.
a few weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll share in the like where you can sign up, and I can send you the pre-order links and all
exactly.
that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what I do is that this recording, once it's compiled and I have cut the head and the tail of it, then it will be in the meetup notes of this meetup. And if you share your presentation, Suhit, or if you want to put a link yourself in the comments, that's how I normally distribute it.
Okay, I can do that. No problem.
Thank you very much. We are just at the whole hour, and we take a lot of pride in keeping people's time. So let's
I'm
end it
really
here.
happy that I was here today. Yes, it's a good thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you
Thanks a
all.
your
It
lot.
was
work.
a
So,
great conversation.
Thanks a
yes.
lot.
Thank you. Really
Bye bye.
appreciate it. Bye. See ya.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.